Welcome to the Sounds of Resistance channel. The decisive advance of the heroic army of Ukraine continues at full speed. The heroic Ukrainian armed forces, continuing their epic operations in the occupied Ukrainian territory, have begun to put the Russian army to a standstill, especially now. The unstoppable progress of Ukraine upset the balance in the Kremlin. Vladimir Putin's happy expression as he annexed Ukrainian cities last Friday was buried in the dark nightmares. The legendary failure of the Russian army led Wagner boss and Chechen boss Kadyrov to revolt against the Russian army, and the Russian general's incredible failures humiliated Putin. While the Kremlin does not seem to be able to overcome the plus shock of this earthquake for a long time, the Ukrainian armed forces continue their all-out counterattacks in both the east and the south without slowing down. The Russian army, which has already turned its order upside down with the mobilization decision, is living in frustration from all the counterattacks it has attempted. Thinking that the mobilization decision announced throughout Russia would benefit the Russian army, Putin realized the result when the first volunteer Russian troops were sent to Ukraine. Even now, most of the professional soldiers of the Russian army do not want to fight on the Ukrainian front. The soldiers of the Russian army, whose resistance to the war has been broken, want to return to their homes as soon as possible. In addition, when the untrained Russian citizens who were forced to volunteer with the mobilization decision were added to these desperate Russian soldiers, the Russian army's structure inevitably began to crack. The Ukrainian army, taking advantage of this situation, increased its pressure operations considerably. The heroes of Ukraine, who caught the Russian troops, started to push the invading forces towards the border in time. The lines of the Ukrainian President Zelensky, which dates back to the Crimea in particular, continue to give the Russian army a hard time in this region. The Russian administration planned to focus on airstrikes in the face of these pressures. However, the airstrikes throughout Ukraine organized by the Russian administration did not yield the desired result. The Ukrainian fighters who ended the airstrike operations organized by the Russian army near the Ukrainian city of Odessa in the Ukrainian skies left the Moscow administration astonished. While the Russian administration could not find any way out, the heroic Ukrainian army carried out another operation that shook the world. The operation of the Ukrainian heroes' city of Liman, which was on the agenda of almost all world media channels, had a great impact. With the Russian army's weight on the Luhansk region, the Ukrainian heroes had reached the city of Liman around Donetsk. In this region, the heroic cavalry of Ukraine, which surrounded the giant Russian army of about 6,000 soldiers from fire, entered into a very harsh conflict. The clashes that started with the artillery shots of the Ukrainian HIMARS artillery units targeting the Russian observation tower gave the Russian soldiers a hard time. Ukrainian HIMARS artillery units shattered the observation tower at the Russian base in the city of Liman with the artillery fire they launched. Surprised by what happened as a result of this successful attack, the Russian forces in the region began to take a position of retreat. The uneasy Russian soldiers who asked their commanders for permission to withdraw surprisingly received a no answer. Had the Russian armed forces sacrificed the soldiers of the Russian base in the city of Liman, Russian troops who had no chance against Ukrainian attacks began to withdraw from Liman because they had to. The Russian administration, on the other hand, predicted that the clashes in Liman would gradually work against the Russian army, so Putin and the Kremlin administration approved the withdrawal request of the 6,000 Russian soldiers in this region. Ukrainian heroes continued their attacks fiercely in order to drive out the Russians from the city of Liman, which they besieged from all sides. While the dust was falling, the soldiers of the Russian army began to flee the city of Liman without looking back. HIMARS artillery units of the Ukrainian army have a great influence on besieging this region. The city of Liman was one of the Russian leaders' eastern logistics center forts. The city of Liman, one of the most important routes through which additional military shipments were made to the Russian army, was besieged and liberated by the heroic Ukrainian army. This defeat, which fell like a bomb on the Russian agenda, was featured in Russian media channels as cautious retreat. After the Russian army was driven out of the city of Liman, it had to flee towards the city of Krasny. The Russian troops, which continued their evacuation movements from this region without interruption, advanced rapidly towards the east. The heroic Ukrainian warriors, on the other hand, proceeded towards the entrance sign of the city after throwing the Russian troops from the city of Liman. With 2 Ukrainian heroic soldiers climbing on top of their armored vehicles and hanging the glorious Ukrainian flag on the sign, the strategic city was completely under the domination of Ukraine. The Liman Liberation Operation, which is considered the greatest victory of the Ukrainian heroes after the gains in the Kharkiv region, was successfully completed. The Russian administration, especially Vladimir Putin's logistics leg in this region, was cut off by the heroic army of Ukraine. Liman's defeat, which put the Kremlin and the Russian administration into a deep low, showed that the Russian army could not stay in this region for a long time. Just last week, Russian leader Vladimir Putin declared that 4 regions, including the city of Liman, belong to Russia, with the so-called referendum movement he mentioned. Just a few days after the so-called Russian referendum, which was not recognized by any of the world's giants, the Ukrainian heroes waving the glorious flag of Ukraine in the city of Liman was enough to put in the ground Putin in the world political arena. It is wondered how the Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who thinks that he will achieve success with the so-called referendum, can hope but this picture of shame, because the Russian parliament and other Russian administrative centers have now run out of patience with Putin's political fiasco. The Russian administration, which was dragged into a very serious depression, lost their dominance on the battlefield by getting irreversible losses. The Ukrainian heroes recapturing the city of Liman facilitated the advances in the Luhansk region. The Ukrainian army is considering continuing through Liman and focusing on liberation operations in Luhansk and its region. The Ukrainian army, which wanted to show its dominance in Donbas and its surroundings, took the city of Liman and gained an opportunity to reach the cities of the Kreminna and Sieverodonetsk. It is known that conflicts still continue around Liman. The Russian troops fleeing this region continue their unsuccessful operations with the soldiers they left behind. These Russian troops are also expected to be withdrawn. If they do not withdraw, the Russian soldiers remaining in this region will end up giving up their lives because the Ukrainian army has announced that it will continue its cleanup operations until there is not a single Russian soldier left in Liman and its surroundings. With the ongoing Liman operations of the heroic Ukrainian army, many soldiers of the Russian army were killed. There are as many wounded as the number of Russian soldiers killed in Liman. The exact figure is not known as operations are still ongoing, but the Russian army took a very serious blow at Liman. The Liman city operation, which went down in history as both a loss of soldiers and a loss of reputation, disgraced the Russian troops at least as much as Vladimir Putin. The huge Russian army of 6,000 people fleeing from the city of Liman requested safe evacuation from Ukraine. However, the Ukrainian armed forces, the Ukrainian administration rejected this request and announced that the operation would continue. As a result of this operation accomplished by the heroes of Ukraine, the so-called referendum movements organized by Russia came to an end. Now the eyes of the world are focused on the steps that the Ukrainian army will take in Donbas and its surroundings. The Ukrainian attacks, which also worried Russian leader Vladimir Putin, are expected to progress to Crimea. It is expected that there will be hot conflicts in Crimea, which is of vital importance especially for 2 leaders, namely both Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. The leaders of both countries have stated in every statement that they will not give up in Crimea. In particular, the statement of the president of Ukraine, which chilling determination, was as follows: "The war started in Crimea and will end in Crimea." Hero Zelensky's ambitious attitude to take Crimea scares the Russian administration. We will see together what will happen in the future. We will continue to share these developments with you. Do not forget to follow our channel in order not to miss these news. Stay cool for now. Thanks for watching.